Welcome to the R7 podcast, sponsored by M is Good. R7 is an innovative, God-inspiring process that explores personal and professional purpose. R7 analyzes 7 strategies to transform your vision and find direction in your organizational marketing. R7 establishes clarity and guidance for the gift we call life. Welcome back to the R7 podcast. As always, I'm super excited to talk about this particular podcast. Today, we have on the podcast with our awesome sidekick, Dave, and our special guest, Nate, Pastor Nate. And so today we're going to be talking about communication, step 5 of the R7 process, which more specifically, we're going to get into messaging and obligatory religious phraseology.
It's a term you love to drop.
Have I dropped this before?
Oh, yeah, you've dropped it before. I don't think anybody's been willing to pick it up. So, as we thought about this, I thought, dude, who better than to pick this up than the one and only Nate Marriner? I mean, he is astute. He is wise. He and I spent some time in ministry together, and then he had a calling of God to go start a church, which is one of the hardest things you will ever do on the planet, including an Ironman, which may feel like 7 years of an Ironman. But, yeah, man, we're excited to have you on today because this is going to be good.
And what I especially like about you, Pastor Nate, is that, you did this from a church plant perspective. You weren't handed something, right? Like you had a vision, you went out and you just did it. And so this idea of messaging and God's calling and vision, like if anybody starts something, whether it's an organization or a company, a church is really, really hard to do. And so like, I really am interested in your perspective on messaging and how you accomplish this great task. Cause you're in your 7th year, you're going to be celebrating your 8th year later this year.
We're in year 7. We're about to celebrate our 7th birthday actually coming up here. So that's going to be in September, and then we'll be charging into year 8, not too long from now. But yeah, you're right though. We started, it wasn't one of these things where we had a sending church or anything like that. We didn't have any money. We didn't have any people. We didn't have a space to meet, but we had a vision from God, and we believed that was all we needed. So, yeah.
Dave and I have talked about doing a podcast on, I have lots of vision, but no money.
We have.
And so tell us, how did you do it, man? Let's get into it. So, you had lots of vision, not a whole lot of money. What happened first? Like, walk us through it.
Well, so I had a great opportunity at a very fast-growing church in the mid 20-teens, to get to experience what a role in a campus pastor setting would be like there. I learned a ton, and it was in the process of doing that job that I started to realize my wife and my calling to church planting. And so we said yes to that. And honestly, it was just prayer and prayer and prayer and prayer and tons of prayer and just seeking God and making sure that's what he was saying, that I wasn't trying to manufacture anything, because, I never stepped into vocational ministry, and I've been serving in pastoral ministry since 2001. I never entered into ministry. I never had a calling on my life that I felt was telling me when I finished up Bible college and started serving God's church, that I was going to be a church planter. Like I never thought, one day God's going to use me to be a part of starting a church. Like never thought that, never dreamed it, never had long discussions with anybody about it. I knew some guys that had planted. There wasn't anything that was massively intriguing about that. And so it was just one of these things where in every season you're experiencing new things. God's preparing you in new ways. And I feel like this is true for any believer. The one thing that really resonated in my heart from the onset was, God, I'm going to serve your church, and I want to get great at saying yes to whatever you want me to do. Mm-hmm. And so those two things, kind of simply, but really in a heart of devotion, moving forward, brought me to the place where we are today. So, yeah.
I think you're muted there, big guy.
Sorry. So you have this vision God gives to you. Mm-hmm. Church planner, which you're like, who, me?
Yeah.
Okay. To his point, so you start out with nothing. How do you get going? Because this idea of, it's vision, there's some destiny in there, there's strategy, and then the communication piece is huge. How do you start tackling all that stuff?
Right. Yeah. Great question. And yeah, so really what I started out with was when I realized that calling, there was, that thing that I couldn't shake in my heart. It was keeping me awake at night, just dreaming about it. Couldn't stop thinking about it. Praying through it over and over. And what I learned really quickly was when it was a definite yes, that we were going to jump in with both feet. That's what it required first. It was a full commitment. It wasn't a dip your toe in the water and see how this goes. It was all or nothing. And then it really, once you take that big, bold step into something that's unknown, what I realized was really what I knew was what I didn't know. And so I wanted to talk to as many people as I could that had planted, that had succeeded, that didn't succeed. I really wanted to have conversations with the guys that didn't make it. And I wanted to ask a lot of questions as to why. I started looking for partners, people to come alongside me. I started pursuing people that could mentor me with prepared questions, respecting people's time. I would come to somebody that had planted and say, hey, if I could just get a meeting with you, it's only going to take 20 minutes. Yeah. And I mean that. And I've already got questions I've prepared. I'd love to ask just to hear your answers and get your perspective. And so doing that actually started some really great relationships with some guys that had gone before me that were willing to take my call at that point and that I could ask questions and really learn from. And they helped to direct me to some great organizations. I ended up learning, kind of the ropes of a church planter from an organization called ARC, the Association of Related Churches. And they're not a denomination. They teach church planters how to plant. They have a playbook, and it's clear. It's very concise for what it is. And what they do is they say, look, we got a 93% success rate for church plants. If you run this playbook and you pray like everything depends on God, that 2 years from now, this church will still exist. Wow. And so we were looking at staggering shifts in the numbers of church plants that would succeed. A lot of that based on just strategy that was coming from guys like the ones at ARC and, at Stadia and some other great church planting organizations as well. And that really shifted that number away from what it used to be, which was 20% would stick. Wow. 80% would fail. And the issue is that a lot of these guys were just, they'd be a part of a larger denomination that would just try to plant with money. They throw some money at you and say, go do it. And of course, I didn't have that luxury. We didn't have any money. But we had a great strategy, and these guys really gave a lot of clarity to defining the why behind what you're doing and helping you communicate and connect that into the context of your local community. So then it became this idea of looking at your community, where you're at, looking at what needs are, and just making a really easy, clear connection to how you were going to help meet a need in your community. And so we got busy doing that. And really to get started from nowhere, simple strategies outside of learning all of that, which that's a whole nother podcast in and of itself in terms of how to plant and the strategy that goes into that. We just started, I took my family and we just started going to where people were that we were trying to reach. And so we just knew right away we're trying to reach young families. Particularly, we were trying to reach dads between the ages of 27 and 31. Mm. So we were trying to reach fathers between 27 and 31. And so we were really intentional about what we did, things that people saw, logo and branding, the way we carried ourselves, the way that the website looked, that sort of thing, just to make sure it would be a church that men would see the website and they would hear messages. They would start to capture some of the vision, and that it would resonate with them, just in the sense that they knew it was a church where they could find a place to belong, have community. But also when they show up, they're not going to be singing, Jesus, I just want to crawl up in your lap and stroke your gentle beard, like,
let's go.
That's Dave's favorite song.
Like a church that we don't apologize for masculinity.
That's so good. Yeah.
That phrase, toxic masculinity, is some co-opted garbage that our culture is trying to throw at us. There's nothing toxic about biblical masculinity. And so we went there. And so what we did was we started finding places where dads were taking their kids and their wives. And we found out it was, shocking. Ice cream places, frozen yogurt shops, stuff like that. So I found a frozen yogurt shop in Holly Springs, talked to the manager, and said, hey, would you, if we came in and we bought everyone's product, whatever they want in your store for an hour, and I don't care what they want or how much of it they want, they just go to the register, they order, and then you just tell them, hey, it's covered by those guys over there. Would you let us set up a small table, and then would you give me 5 minutes at the end of the hour just to tell people who we are and what we're about? And the store manager said, the owner of the store, he said, yeah, absolutely. And we'll give you a discount like we're doing a spirit night for a school. And so we did that 3 times. And in those 3 times, and building a launch team's tough, man. But we added 21 adults to our launch team just by going to places like that where, it was really going to that Froyo shop where people were, where the targeted families we're trying to reach were, and just doing a random act of kindness, a gesture, showing them, hey, this is who we are. Like, we want to be generous and kind to people. And we don't want to make any mistakes about the fact that, we're trying to reach you and your family. And that gave us traction and, that sort of thing. And so God started slowly building that team. And over a 1.5 year period from when we stepped out of where I was serving in full-time ministry, in May of 2016, up until we launched, we brought together a team of about, I think it was about 60. It's not about, it was exactly 65 humans. 41 of them were adults. But man, if a kid was strong enough to hold a sign, I don't care if you're 3, it's like you're on the team.
I love it.
So when launch day came, all those folks were serving in some capacity area of ministry. We sent out mailers. We sent out close to 100,000 mailers within a 7-mile radius of where we're going to launch in Apex, and invited the community to come be a part. And that's how the story got started. So that's how we built a launch team. And then, really what we did was we spent the last 6 weeks before we launched in training people on how to do what we do, so that was the moment where we said, okay, these are the processes. This is what our greet team is going to be. We call it frontline, and these are the areas and what you're going to do. This is kids ministry. These are our safety protocols. These are our age ranges, our curriculum. And, this is how you access everything. Got our band ready. We had gotten a couple of part-time staff hired. We had a preview service, one of those, so people could come on an off night and kind of see what was going to happen before it happened. And then we had a couple of practice services. And really the last 6 weeks was a lot of us just figuring out how we're going to get our gear set up and torn down in time, because we had a limited window. We could only get in the building at a certain time, but we had to be ready to go by a certain time, and we had to be out by a certain time. And so we were just trying to get faster and more precise with everything we did, evaluating everything. And then launch day hit, and the church was born, man. Yeah,
I love it.
It's an incredible story.
I love it.
Let's talk about messaging. In terms of your overall vision, in terms of your best message, your worst message. What worked, what didn't work.
Sure. Well, the worst message I've ever given, I was told, was before we planted.
Okay.
I was at a church planting assessment up in Indianapolis, and part of that assessment was that you had to speak for some given period of time, and you had to have a very brief set of subject matter. It's like a 1 or a 2 point message. And so I talked about the idea of making it better. Like, how do we ameliorate? Like, how do we improve? And I was told by those that heard it, like by those that were evaluating me, that it was terrible. They said, man, your marks are great everywhere except for this. So that was super encouraging for me, right before we went to launch a church. And I'm like, well, okay, that's the thing that I was better at. But they just, what they said was, you really didn't connect the two ideas, and you didn't really drive a point home well. And so for me, feedback's great. I try to thrive on that. You've heard that old adage, the feedback is the breakfast of champions. I mean, if you chew on it, it really is. And so I took that to heart, and I said, well, how can we be more clear in what we do? So that, along with any message where if you're kind of hazy on what you're talking about, everybody else that's listening is going to be lost, right? They all fall in lockstep. The best message that I've ever communicated, in terms of just, if we're talking about like as a pastoral communicator, communicating the Bible, which I know we can talk about a lot of things, like what does your messaging look like and how is it clear in other ways, connecting people to the vision. We'll come to that. The best message I think I've ever given as a biblical communicator is it's a very evangelistic message where what I do is I try to give people that doubt the resurrection something they didn't have before. And what I'm attempting to do in that message is to show people that in modern times think very, very, just kind of staunchly towards this idea that the resurrection is a myth that was created 100 to 200 years after the apostles died, after those that were claimed to be gospel writers died. And so what I do is I walk back the timeline in the New Testament. And what I do is I only use the letters that the Apostle Paul wrote that both biblical scholars and historical academic non-biblical scholars, secular scholars, all agree were 100% written by the Apostle Paul. And so since they're all in agreement on that, we take the timeline just from those epistles and we start walking it back and showing how the idea that the resurrection is a myth is impossible, because a myth usually starts, it takes about 60 years after the death of someone for a myth or a legend to take place, because all the eyewitnesses that have seen it have died. Well, we walk it back in the New Testament to the point where you can see that somewhere between 3 to 5 years after Jesus had died on the cross and resurrected, that the Apostle Paul actually was converted to Christianity and started telling people about the resurrection. And so at the end of the message, what I tell people is, hey, does this mean that you have to believe that Jesus was resurrected? No. But what it does mean is that it is factually impossible that you would think the resurrection of Jesus Christ is a legend, because I have proven beyond any reasonable doubt that the people that lived at the time of Jesus believed that he was resurrected. So that's, in terms of communication, best message, that one.
I love it.
Yeah. But and then in terms of what we do as a church, as an organization that's really trying to do what we're mandated, what we're commissioned to do in Matthew 28, to be able to make disciples, to see followers of Jesus grow in their faith in Jesus to the point where they understand God's word and have a strong relationship with him, to the point where they are making disciples as well. We keep our vision extremely simple, extremely portable, right? So the vision of Peak City Church is reaching, growing, sending. And then when we take the next step to put a little meat on the bone, we are reaching people. I think everybody knows what that means. You don't have to be a Christian to understand that you're trying to reach somebody, with a message or an idea or something like that. We are growing disciples. Now that sometimes you got to take a little time to explain what a disciple means. But part of what the church is supposed to do is actually teach people what those things mean. Like, it's okay for me in a sermon to say the word sanctification. It's not okay for me to say that and not explain what that is, And so what I'm always trying to do when I'm communicating is I'm speaking to an audience and I'm telling myself there are people here that are not Christians, that don't have experience with Christianity, that don't believe. And so when you speak to this audience, or when I speak to the camera that's watching at church online, I do that with that in mind. So I don't just assume that everybody knows stories from the Bible. If I'm going to refer to something in the Old Testament, I'll say something along the lines of, hey, well, in the first half of your Bible, there's this story, and I give the Cliff Notes version of that, and it brings everybody in. So the second step is that we are growing disciples, and then we are sending people into their purpose, or sometimes we say we're sending people into their God-given purpose. So we keep it really, really simple, easy, and portable, reaching, growing, and sending. Now, right down to the mission of our church as well. The mission statement's one that we try to make clear, and we have very, very easy processes that are extremely easy to grasp onto for people to go further to understand what the mission and vision of the church are. In fact, we call that next steps. Like, people wonder, well, what do we do next? How do we connect further? Well, you take your next step, and that's something that's logical. It makes sense. Okay, that's where I go next. And so that's a discipleship process that we have over a series of weeks for people that are coming into the church, and we explain that simple vision of reaching people, of growing disciples, of sending people into their purpose, to their calling. We talk about the mission of the church, which I tell people the capital C church should all have the same mission. We should all be on the same page and have some sort of Matthew 28 or Acts 1:8 focused vision for the church. And so everybody phrases it differently. The way we say it at Peak City is that we're leading people to new life in Jesus Christ. And then I explain within the context of next steps what that means and how we're doing it. So that it's not just some pithy statement, but it takes simple phraseology, I believe, that actually makes sense to get people to the table where you can take them further. Just like anybody else that has a brand, has a product, has something that they're passionate about, and they want to see other people get passionate about it. Well, put the cookies on the bottom shelf, right? And if you do that, it's going to smell good. It's going to get a hold of, and people might listen to what you have to say.
I have so many things to talk to you about right now because that was absolutely beautifully orchestrated. I love that. I've asked this question of vision to many pastors. This is my 24th year of doing marketing in a Christian organization that I started in November of 2001. And a lot of times I ask a pastor, okay, what's your vision? And they say, hey, can you, just one second, can you go get our pamphlet? Or can you, what's that banner say on the wall over there? And so I immediately go with, that's not portable. That's not vision. You have no vision. And I learned early on not to say that because it's been very uncomfortable for the rest of the meeting if I do that. And so when you just rattle that off, man, and it's in your heart and you already know, exactly what you're doing, where you're going, I can tell, you could just see the smoke of battle coming off you. So that's incredible that you just did that. So good job. Awesome. You passed, man. A+.
We can finish the talk. All right.
No.
Not everybody passes. He put the hook down.
Yeah. But let me ask you this, because I think I can say this. I'm just going to say it anyway. I'm working with a very large organization right now, and we are building a discipleship app.
Oh, awesome.
And the name is called Halius.
Nice.
And so Halius means fisher of men. And so, but in your own words, because discipleship, we're talking about messaging today, and we're talking about obligatory religious phraseology, which I didn't explain in the beginning half of this. We just said ORPs. So ORPs are basically, things that you say that sound cool, but have no meaning to anybody, including the person who says it. And so we always want to create messaging that resonates with our donors, our first-time guests, our customers, our clients, right? You don't want to create messaging that they don't understand because they just move on. We live in an ADD world where people just don't have time to ask, what does that mean? So you've got to hit them, exactly with what you're doing. In fact, there's all kinds of different shows out there right now that just are really cool branding shows that give this idea. But anyway, disciples has this meaning. I think you referred to it yourself, that, like not many people would know what a disciple is. If you didn't have disciple in the English dictionary, what word would you use to explain disciples?
Follower.
Okay, that's good.
Follower. Yeah. Right. Exactly. It would not be something where, if you want to keep it as concise and clear as possible, then, you can mess with, you might have heard this before. I heard some pastor say this, and I thought, well, that's brilliant. People use the term Christian, and that can mean anything, especially in the South. Some guy on the street that doesn't care anything about God, that, is ready to split hell wide open, can probably quote scripture better than a lot of Christians or people that claim you can do a lot of things with the phrase Christian this day and age, but
it could be a potluck, Nate. It could be a potluck, bro.
Yeah.
Come have a meal. We're all Christians. It's good.
That's right. That's right. I've heard that phrase so many times. Well, we're all Christians here. I'm like, are we? Are we? Oh, okay. But when you say follower, that means something. That means that you set your focus on emulating your life on not you, on someone else. Who are you following? And when you say that you're a follower of Jesus, then that's explaining what's happening here. It's like, if you're a follower, or you can kind of delve into the whole idea of, like, when you submit yourself to the lordship of Jesus, then you're not living your life for yourself. You're not setting your own course. You are actually now following the good shepherd. You read John 10. and it'll break it all down for you there. I'm actually taking a group of guys through a Bible study in Psalm 23 and John 10 every week right now. A group of guys that I am discipling, that I'm pouring into, that I'm leading, I'm coaching, and I'm teaching the Word of God to them, and showing them what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ.
It's funny, Nate. Sometimes I get stuck in Star Wars, and I just think of the word apprentice.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Then you think of put in cultural context of what people think about that they're into, and that idea of apprenticeship is you're learning for a purpose, you're growing for a purpose, you're going forward for something. So, I think it's interesting, Dave. I love that you pushed on this because it does force us at times to think about what does the culture look like and what's the best, phraseology or terms we can use that's going to help people clearly understand what that looks like. Because what I would ask you, Nate, is like, let's go all the way back to the ice cream shop. Like, you got to think about how you're going to communicate that night about the church, and you get your 5 minutes at the end. What are you going to say? How simple did you have to make that?
Yeah, great question, man. One of those things they coach you on with this great network of church planting coaches that I was a part of.
You're talking about ARC, right?
Yeah, talking about the Association of Related Churches, talking about ARC.
Yeah.
They worked you hard on a 30-second, a 60-second, and a 90-second elevator pitch.
Nice.
And they just said, you want to be ready. If you're in the line at Chick-fil-A, use the 30-second pitch. It might be loud, but you might be able to get that across. If you're in a situation where you're stuck in the elevator, you need that 30-second elevator pitch, maybe shorter than that. And so really what I did was I took that last 5 minutes and I gave 90 seconds of who we are, what we were coming to do, and really just a touch of the why, behind what we were doing. And I helped people connect to their why, because a lot of people simply don't understand, what their purpose in life is at all. And we told them that we're not just going to help them get a glimpse of it, but we'll help them fulfill it. And then really what sold itself was, I asked the question, I said, would you want to be a part of a community of people that are out in the community, actually loving people, displaying the kindness of God instead of talking about it and never showing it? And if that's something that you're interested in, we'd love for you to talk to us about being a part of this brand new church. And that was kind of the bow at the end. And people wanted to talk about it, and they wanted to join the launch team.
Does it surprise you how powerful the idea of community really is? Because in our pre-show, Dave, you were talking about, how important community was post-COVID. Nate, from what you've seen, in your years now at Peak City, has the community piece just been like the lightning rod that you've been shocked to see how much people have been bought into?
Yeah, it's funny how when you start a new church, because the church, it's not just an organization, it's an organism. It's living, it's growing. And as it matures and goes through different phases, it takes on different needs, different shapes, different strengths, different weaknesses. One of the things that I experienced really as a church planter was how long it took. So it was very quick for a small group of people. They really cemented pretty quickly with each other. But it took much, much longer for buy-in for people that hung around for a long time before they ever fully engaged, before they ever served, before they ever connected in a group, before they ever gave or anything like that. But once they did, they would chase hell with a water pistol with you. I mean, it just took time. So oddly enough, and this is important for us when we're talking about community, one of the things that my trainers and like coaches that were investing in me and ARC talked about, and this is a really, really important detail for them, is they would say, hey, as you're building this launch team, don't go launch in small groups. Don't do that before you launch the church. Don't dare do that. And so what they did was they cast this vision of saying, what you'll do is you'll create a culture of people that say, hey, I remember when it was just us, like the 15 of us in Nate's living room, and somebody had a guitar and Nate gave a message. That was the real core. That was when it was the real church. And the Christianese term, so we're talking about bad phraseology, they use, it still sticks in my mind. They said you're creating a back to Egypt culture.
Wow.
Where people just want to go back to the former things. And the Egypt culture, if the reference, if you guys or listen to this and you're like, what is he talking about? The idea in the Bible is that, in Egypt, Israel, the nation of Israel, were slaves. And they said that they would rather go back to slavery because at least they had food in their belly every night, and so they basically, my coaches were saying, don't create a culture where they're going to want to go back to something. Treat it this way. They said, on the launch day, God is going to give you the bride of Christ. Don't start doing married people stuff before the wedding day. And that'll preach right there, man. I mean, and I took that to heart. We didn't launch small groups until 6 months after the launch day of our church on September 10th, 2017. It's one of the best moves we ever made. We had 6 months to figure out who was among us, who had some modicum of depth of the relationship with God or a growing faith in Christ. And we could identify people much more easily. It gave us a better idea of how to communicate to our church to move them from the seats into action. On small levels, we started doing that just by doing outreaches that were all plays. In other words, everybody can be a part, everybody can come. And we just started working on our messaging on stage. How quick can we do our announcements? And then what kind of social media connection, digital media connections, email campaigns, things like that. What's working to move people into action? It gave us 6 months of figuring out what worked for us. And oddly enough, man, front page, splash page of our website, more often than not, was the first place that people would look. So it's probably true for a lot of organizations out there. Just remember, it's not always going to be your social media presence. It's what you display with your name on it on the web. A lot of times it's key. And, once we figured those things out, we had a group launch strategy that I had learned at a great church that was rapidly growing, where they actually sent me and 3 other guys down to Atlanta to learn from the North Point guys on how they launch groups. And, that was where we learned how to do it. And I replicated that into the context at Peak City. And, that's really where that started. So community over time, it's changed quite a bit. But when we did this right with small groups and the meta church setting where we got people in these groups of 8 to 12 people, and we saw that and we consistently invested in it and it grew, we had 2.5 years of runway until we hit the pandemic. And we were in a rented facility owned by the town. And so we didn't have a pot to pee in or a window to throw it out of, like the rednecks would say, right? Like we had nothing when the shutdown happened. They were like, hey, sorry. So we went online because it was the only option that we had. And everybody's angry because we're not meeting, and people are sending hate emails to me and our staff, and because they didn't understand that we had nowhere to go and nothing we could do. And through all that stuff, we were navigating everything just without a playbook like everybody else. But we had gotten the contract on Apex High School, and we had grown to the point. So by the time we hit the pandemic, the church, after it had sifted down to its bottom level, had almost tripled in size since then over the next, 2 years and 2 months or so. And we'd outgrown our space. We're doing 3 services in a little tiny facility. They would not give us any more time to rent during the day. So the next move was to find someplace bigger. And then really for us, it was a huge point of prayer. God opened a door for us to be able to get contracts on a high school they had just built in our community. It was brand new because they raised the old school down. They built the new one. No church had been able to rent that space, that facility, for 23 years. And this is a huge God thing for us. It was a miracle. The school system actually called us. They said, hey, are you ready to sign contracts and rent Apex High School? And I asked the question on the phone. I said, hey, is this supposed to be how this happens? Like, how did you even know to call me? And the response I got on the other end of the line was, Pastor Marriner, nothing about this call is orthodox or how it's supposed to happen. Are you ready to sign these contracts?
I love it.
So we were supposed to go into the high school a week after the shutdown happened.
Oh,
so when we were stuck, we thought we didn't know what the plan would be moving forward. But then the school system called us again when they, I guess, laxed some restrictions and said, hey, if you want to, you can rent the parking lot of the high school. Rent it. I'm like, okay, fine, no problem. So as soon as they let us do that, we started doing outdoor church. We did it for a year.
wow.
And, the bottom line is God's church gathers. God's church is a community. And, we call this thing social media. It's really not. It's almost like the crack cocaine of community in some ways, where people think that's the sustenance for relationship that they need. It isn't. It's artificial. You need to be in the presence of other people. You need to be around others. And so, we ran with this idea that Peak City Church was a safe space to hear a dangerous message. And that was just kind of thought provoking. And we spoke to the fact that we said it's a safe space because you're outside. Come on, what you got to worry about? You don't have to wear a mask. If you want to, no one's going to say, hey, take that off your face. Do what you want, but just come. And be a part of community, be around some people, actually talk to some people you're in the presence of. And then we explained the dangerous message, when we talked about the great exchange, how someone who was a wretch that was shaking their fist at God, their creator, saying, I want to do my life my way by my rule, would be met, instead of being met with condemnation and damnation, they were met with a display of love, that while we were busy doing this, telling God what we knew better, that he died for our sins. He died to redeem us from the worst parts of who we are, so that we could have a full and true relationship with him. So we had fun walking that out over that year. Community grew. It was because, honestly, by the time we hit the pandemic, we had about 20 small groups meeting. It was because of that community, the large group gathering, and the opportunity that we still had for smaller groups to gather. And we leveraged everything we could for that. Okay. During the shutdown, I bought multiple Zoom licenses. I got them all to my group leaders so that there was one for every group any day of the week they were meeting. And so we had multiple groups meeting every day. So we had multiple licenses in play for those groups, so that while everybody was stuck during the shutdown or whatever, everyone could connect via Zoom. And then, as soon as they could start gathering in person again together, they did. A lot of them just did it out in the yard, just to be together. And those small groups and that kind of meta community that was connected, on top of the fact that we weren't going to stop meeting. We would take whatever opportunity we had. And for us, it was just 50 weeks booked outside, and so it didn't matter, rain, snow, whatever, sleet, burning heat. We went for it. We had church where we'd set up all of our gear under, it's kind of a canopy at the wall of the school. So we had church in the rain. We just met whenever we possibly could. The only times that we had to really cancel were when it snowed and iced all over the roads and people couldn't get there. In fact, I remember February or when it was like a torrential downpour and we would lose $100,000 worth of sound and audio equipment to be outside. So one February, it snowed and iced or rained every single week in February. So we had to do online every week in February. And that was the most damaging month that we ever experienced during the pandemic, because people couldn't gather. They started looking for some place that had a space where you could go inside and you could gather, because it's that important.
Nate, I want to thank you for being on the podcast today. I got 2 more questions for you, man. This has been awesome. We're talking about communicating and messaging, right? And you're talking about your vision of reaching, growing, and sending. And I want to go back to, the ice cream parlor. Ice cream shop, whatever.
And taco.
Yeah. And tacos.
Yeah.
When you're giving your message and it's a 30 or 60 or 90, which you were coached up on ARC, what do you think people saw in you? Specifically, what fruit of the Spirit do you think they saw when you're giving that messaging? Because a lot of times we talk about we want to get our messaging right. But a lot of times it's, what do people feel when they hear you? And so we just saw a good example of this is, we just saw the presidential debates. Most of us watched that and we go, I hear what he's saying, but what I felt was this dude was old, so what, if you could, I know it's probably a question you probably haven't been asked before, but you think about the fruit of the Spirit and what people bought into. They bought into the vision, but they also bought into you and your belief system. What do you think that was?
Well, I think it was a fruit that was on display for me to talk for 90 seconds and stop. It was self-control.
Okay.
Nice.
That's great.
Let's keep it real.
Know yourself. Right? So what I tell
Less
people
is more.
Go ahead, David. What were you saying?
No, I said less is more. There you go.
What I tell people all the time about the fruit of the Spirit is this. It's, we talk about how do you know, what does spiritual growth look like? And the plumb line, the measuring stick that we're given in the scripture is the fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah.
Because none of us get a pass on that. You don't get to choose between love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. You you don't get to say, well, I'll just grow in love and in peace, and in gentleness, but I will have no self-control, and I will have no patience. I'll be short-tempered and hot with everybody, and that's fine. It's not. So those aspects of the transforming work that Jesus is doing within you are all growing, and it's not just one of these things where we get to say, well, I'm more of this or more of that, but we should desire all of those things. So I don't know, man. I think if there's any one thing that somebody could pick up on when you're speaking passionately about Jesus, I would hope that it's a combination of all of those gifts working together, because that's what walking to maturity looks like.
Yeah.
And honestly, and I know this doesn't just lock in just with the fruit of the Spirit, but what I tell people at Peak City all the time is this: like we have 7 DNA statements too that help to define the why. We just want to make it clear why we do what we do. There's a reason for everything, but one of those statements is it's not about me. And it's not one of these, look, I know you have an opinion, but we don't care about it kind of statements. That's not what that means at all. It's not a throw off for us. It's not about me. It's not about Nate Marriner. It's not about any one person in our church. We exist for the people that haven't shown up yet. That's why it's not about me. And so what we talk about at Peak City so often is, and again, I'm not trying to use one of these buzzword phrases here, but the way we say it at Peak City is we say that we are unapologetically evangelistic. Like we are always trying to reach people that haven't been reached yet, because one of the aspects of spiritual growth that goes along with seeing those fruit grow is that we are engaged in telling people about Jesus, inviting people to an encounter with Jesus. Like we're not trying to invite a bunch of people to be members of Peak City Church. We're inviting people to a relationship with Jesus Christ. In fact, at Peak City, we don't even have membership. It doesn't exist. We do this thing, it's completely different. We call it partnership, because members have rights, but partners have responsibilities. There's ownership involved in that. And that's a culture that people say, okay, this isn't just about, me signing a document that says that I have these rights now. In fact, everything that we do says, hey, if you want to have more influence and more opportunity, if there's a need for a church-wide vote, then we've got to see that you're engaged in serving, that you're engaged in community, and you're engaged in giving. And we say that just keeps guardrails up for you to stay focused on the life of the church. And it's the hope that as they're doing that the right people have influence, and that the church will continue to follow God's vision because they're passionately seeking him. So we talk about how when we say it's not about me, circle back, it's one of these things where you've got to be engaged in the work of evangelism if you're going to grow to maturity in Christ. And if you're not at all a part of that, then you can claim to be a mature believer, but it's just lip service. So as you see the outflow of the fruit of the Spirit, honestly, I think it really circles back to, in a small amount of time, if you're able to connect people's hearts to the vision that God's given you, to reach people that are far from him, and they can see that compassion in action, that's what's going to help connect the dot. And so that's why we were actually doing an act of service. So it's not just about the words that we're saying, but the action we're putting on display. And hopefully in 30, 60, 90 seconds, you can cast a compelling enough vision where people say, well, I think I'd be interested in hearing more about that. They might not sign in blood, but they might sign in pencil.
Dave, can you wrap us up and kind of give us a summary of the takeaway for today's podcast?
Yeah, I think if I'm sitting here in my car and I'm driving and I'm listening, I get challenged with the idea of the 30, 60, 90, right? And even from a business standpoint, we took a bunch of new people, a couple, probably maybe 8 months ago, and we had them, you're going to love this, Nate, we had them practice their elevators pitch in the elevator. We were the 4th floor, the top floor of a building. We're like, all right, well, you're going to figure this out. Go. We would make them practice on both sides, going up and going down. And it's one of those things where you've got to find a way to use simple and clear enough language that you can communicate that in a short amount of time, right? That's the summary to that idea. And if you're not and you don't, they're going to fall asleep and they're going to go, okay. And they're going to start thinking about where they got to be, why they got to be there, who else is pulling on them, and you're going to lose them. So I think this idea of messaging, it, goes back to, there have been books written about Steve Jobs and the simplicity of the iPhone. It's the same idea. You've got to be simple and clear to get your message through, because there's a lot of other things that are competing from a messaging standpoint with each and every person. Dave, you've talked about that many, many times. So, this idea, whether you're leading a church, you're leading, a .org, or even if you're starting a company, you've got to be clear. You've got to be simple. You've got to be portable. You have to know up, down, left, and right what your vision is, be able to communicate it clearly, and be able to attract the people around you. Those are the things you've got to be able to do. And if you do that, you've got a shot.
And Pastor, when you went through that ARC process, it sounds like something you haven't been through before. And so there was probably a lot of challenge there, a lot of rigor that you had to go through. And I'm sure you come across as a man of action. Like, I just want to go do this. Do I have to rehearse this again? But I could tell you're thankful that you did, because, those situations came up.
Yeah. At the beginning of the podcast, I mentioned how I kind of came in saying, look, what I know is what I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of challenges, a bunch of hurdles, a bunch of things that I'm going to face that I've no clue about. And so I'm trying to surround myself with people that have walked before me. And the organization I partnered with was one that allowed me to stand on a lot of guys' shoulders that have gone before us. The guy that founded it, his heart was, hey, don't ever forget about the little guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means a lot for a lot of people. But it also made me someone who right away, as soon as the next class of planners came in 6 months later, I connected with them. Our church in some way was trying to support them. And I offered my time to say, hi, I'm in it right now, man. I'm right here in the beginnings. So if you need somebody to talk to that's still figuring it out too, I'm here. Just holding on to an attitude that says, what you know is what you don't know. And it makes you a voracious learner, but it also cautions you when you hear people say, hey, these are things to avoid. Even if in your mind you say, no, that can't be right. You've got to lean on the wisdom of the people that have walked before you before.
That's awesome. We appreciate you being on the podcast, man. This is super helpful for people out there that are starting an organization or starting a church. And we'll leave some contact information up there, so you can, if people are listening to this or watching and want to get a hold of us in any way, shape, or form, we'd love to answer your questions. So
yeah,
thanks for
and I was
us.
going to bring up real quick, Dave, before we sign off, and just give you a chance, Nate. There's somebody listening and they're in the Triangle area and they want to check out Peak City. I mean, I was blessed to be there the day you launched.
Yeah.
I sent Dave the picture of you and I together that day, and I've been to your church many times. I love what God's done there. But if somebody wants to come check out Peak City, tell them how they can do it.
Yeah, so it's easy to find us. Our website is just peakcity.church, not .com, but .church. And so service times and locations are there. We meet at Apex High School every Sunday at 9:15 and 11 o'clock, peakcity.church. You can connect with our staff. You can see everything that we can engage your whole family in. And if you want more information, that's the easiest place to grab it all.
Love it.
All right, sounds good. Thanks again for joining us. I want to give special thanks to our sponsor, M is Good. Want to learn more about M is Good? Go to misgood.com. Join us again next week as we continue to uncover the secrets to success with faith-based testimonies and the power of R7. Remember, destiny awaits, but time does not.